we are going to talk about some sort of thought processes of processing images before bringing them into Silver Efex Pro 2, but I want to just start right out accessing these new film types because that's what this whole webinar is about. So for anyone not familiar, basically this is the Silver Efex Pro 2 interface, and if you move over to the right-hand side of the interface, we have what was the 18 most popular black and white film types when Silver Efex Pro was developed. And then we also have this brand new, and actually these new presets, not presets, I'm sorry, film emulations, film types that are built into the software now are found both in the new section of the film types drop-down menu, and then they are also sort of interspersed into the, if you will, proper ISO is setting from the drop-down menu as well. I don't know. I would imagine this new section will disappear at some point, and then we'll just have each of the film types sort of built in. But because we do have these 10 brand new film types, and they are creating these very different looks and totally different feel to the image, we've sort of separated these out, or I should say, NIK software, DxO has separated these out. Now, let's do that one more time. For anyone who might have missed the very beginning there, I'm going to click onto the film type section here. We're going to talk about the grain, color sensitivity, levels and curves, how you can adjust those to your liking and what they mean and how they work. But for now, again, just to access the software, or the new film types, you just click on the drop-down menu. And any of the new ones, so the ADOX Silver Max or the Filmapan 100, are going to be accessible here. All right, so let's scroll all the way down, and let's just talk about these different film types a little bit, because each one is going to create a different look and feel. I'm assuming if you're here, you're interested in these film types. And so part of me figures that maybe there's some film shooters out there, whether you used to shoot film or maybe you still shoot film. What you should be able to find is that these emulations are very close to what this image would have looked like had it been shot with those particular, or that particular film type at this particular exposure, right? So the beauty of this is that you don't have to have ever shot film before to enjoy these. But if you do have a particular favorite film type, you should find that these are pretty darn close to what this image would have looked like had it been shot with that particular film. In this case, I really like this Agfa Scala 100 or 200X. So I'm going to click on that. And from there, we can always move into our grain, our color sensitivity, or our levels and curves. And you can see this is the curve that is associated with that particular film type. But the other thing that you can, of course, do is still utilize all of the rest of the tools palette. So in this case, and in fact, just a sort of typical workflow, if I'm going to be playing with these or using these film types, I'm typically going to start with probably a preset on the left, and then maybe a film type. Or if I skip the presets on the left, in fact, let's hide those. Clicking on the hide and show button in the upper left corner. So back over to the right-hand side. In terms of workflow, I would do my post-processing, my raw processing, come into Silver Efex, and then probably choose a film type, and then possibly a color filter. And then I would actually go from the global adjustments into selective, and then finish with the finishing adjustments. So, oftentimes the NIK plugins are designed from top down. You'd sort of use these tools from the top down. But because the film types and the color filters are global adjustments and highly transformative adjustments in many cases, I would recommend starting with the film types and the color filters so that it's pretty straightforward. You see what the film's doing, you like what's happening, maybe we click on the red color filter. I don't think there's going to be a dramatic shift. I guess when I click on the blue color filter there is, because the steps here from the Sean Bory stepwell are primarily red and yellow. But as we click on the color filters, you can see that it's highly transformative. And then from there, I would go into my global adjustments and start to adjust from there. So amplify the whites a little bit. I'm going to add some soft contrast, and actually maybe even darken down the dynamic brightness a bit. Now, I don't want to spend much time on this image, but I do kind of want to point out the fact that this photograph works really nicely with these film types. If we take a look at this before and after, there's the original image where all of the tones are kind of all the same. There isn't a whole lot of contrast, but we've got these nice shapes and form going on with our beautiful black and white photograph. And then as we release the compare button here, we see the after image. Now I'm starting to bring out the depth in the photograph, right? And we're starting to see those individual steps and stairs. I think if we were to spend some more time on this image, I would use the control points, which we'll talk about in a bit, to kind of hone in the image a little bit more and to direct your attention as the viewer a lot more. For now, though, so that we can stick to the film types for as long as possible, at least 45 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and just click the OK button. That's in the lower right corner of the interface here. And what's going to happen is any of the adjustments that we've made here within Silver Efex Pro are going to be applied to our image. I launched the software from Photoshop in this case. So the background layer will be duplicated and we'll have an adjustment made to the duplicated background. I'm going to launch this software from Photolab 3 as well. And so I just want to mention that when we came onto the webinar, when we started the webinar, I was already open in Silver Efex. So usually I would just launch from Photoshop or from Photolab 3 at the beginning of the webinar. But anyways, here we are. We've got our original color image and then our enhanced image. I think this photo would actually do really well with a border as well, a film border. So maybe if we've got some time, we'll come back to that. For now, let's actually switch over into Photolab 3. And I want to just take a look at the GoToWebinar control panel and then also mention the fact that these film types, and for that matter, anything that you do in any of the NIK plugins are going to be kind of reliant on the things that you do in your raw processing. So you want to kind of set your image up in the raw processing sort of portion of your workflow, and then you go into something like Silver Efex or Color Efex or Viveza 2. And it is important that you can create a completely different look with that Scala 200x preset or film emulation when you do different things with your raw image. So I want to point that out and hopefully even show you an example or two of that. So let's see here. Looking forward. Cool. Richard, very good. I'm just taking a look at the comments here. Very good. Oh man, Roger, it's a dull, dark day. Roger, if it makes you feel any better, in Rochester, New York right now, it's a dull, dark day and it's cold and rainy as well. So I'm right there with you, but it's nice and warm in here and we're having some fun in the webinar, so it's all good. So we've got our next image. And on this photograph, this is an image by my friend Kevin Young. I think he shot this one in Australia, if I remember correctly. I think it's named properly, so we could probably take a look at that. But anyways, it's this really wonderful color photograph, and we're going to transform it in black and white, and it's going to give us an opportunity to talk about some of the tools within the film emulation section. So in this case, let's minimize. I'm going to just close my histogram down a little bit and just point out some of the tools that I've used in DxO. So in our Photolab software here, I say it like it's mine. It feels like it's mine now because I've started to use this so much. But I really just made a slight white balance adjustment. No, I didn't. I think I meant to. I'm going to go ahead and just warm it just a touch, just a little bit. And then I just have the DxO Smart Lighting on because the image is a little bit underexposed. And the DxO Smart Lighting basically just cleans it right up for me. Another tool that works nicely, and I'm not going to use it in this case so we can get a better sense of what's happening within the Silver Efex film emulations, but this DxO Clearview Plus tool is a really interesting tool for bringing out textures and kind of sharpening the image, but kind of not at the same time. So let's just take a quick look at the before and after. Here's the before. There's the after. It does a nice subtle job. You can of course open this up and turn this up and down as well. So if it needed to be more subtle or you wanted more of it, you could do that. I'm going to turn it off for now. And we're going to launch into the Silver Efex Pro software from Photolab 3. And to do that, you move into the lower sort of right corner of the Customize interface. If you're in the Photo Library interface, if you follow me to the upper left corner, you'll actually find the NIK collection in the upper right corner of the interface. So you can access this software, the NIK plugins, from either portion of the interface, the Photo Library or the Customize section. And for now, I'm going to click into the NIK collection button in the lower right corner, and we're just going to open up Silver Efex Pro 2. And next, we're going to talk about all of the great tools that are built into the film emulation portion of Silver Efex. As that's launching, let's just make sure everybody's good to go with go to webinar. Cool. Kitty says it's 55 degrees in Austin, Texas. That's beautiful. It's a good time. I think our Silver Efex probably launched behind. There we go. All right, so right off the bat, we've got this nice sort of subtle black and white image. It's a nice conversion. I think where we're really going to get some oomph out of this image is when we start playing with the color sensitivity. So first things first, let's click into our presets, or sorry, I keep calling them that. They're film types. We'll click on the film emulations. I'm going to go ahead and just scroll right down to the bottom. So of course you can pick and choose anything you want from any of these film emulations, but for now I'm going to go ahead and just find the one that I like the most in the new portion here. And I do love the ADOX Silver. So the Silver Max here is going to be like a high contrast look, whereas the Scala is going to be a lower contrast look and feel. Both of them are relatively low ISO films, so you don't get a whole lot of grain out of them, whereas when we move into something like the Berger or the Polaroid, both of the Polaroids I think are higher ISO, 400 and 3200. The funny thing about Polaroid film though is that it doesn't work the same way as a normal grain structure that's built into a standard flexible back film. Now, we don't need to go down that path too far, but it is interesting to note that the grain that you'd get from an ISO 3200 speed Polaroid is going to be very different than the grain that you're going to see even in the amount from, let's say, the T-Max 3200 speed film. So I'm kind of digging the Ilford Pan 100 in this case. That's a common film that I shoot with still. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And let's move into the different types of our tools within our film types. So first things first, we have our grain, and we have two tools within the grain section, our grain per pixel, and then the hardness of the grain per pixel. And to get a really good sense of what's happening in the grain section, I'm going to go ahead and just click the zoom button in the upper right corner of the interface. That's going to zoom us into the 100% percentage by default. And I want to show you two different parts of this image when we're playing with the grain per pixel, because in a low frequency portion of an image, like the sky, where we've got this nice transition of that blue, we're going to see a lot more of that grain show up when we take the grain per pixel slider over towards the left side. It's just going to be a lot more noticeable. Whereas if we go into the high frequency areas where there's a lot of texture and details, some of that grain kind of gets hidden away by those textures and details. In the sense of film, grain makes up these image details. It's the orientation of and the way that the exposure works of the grain that actually gives us these details. When we're overlaying this sort of texture on our digital image, it renders in a way that looks the same, but yet we have different kinds of controls so that you can actually get slightly different feel out of the grain. So to do that, first of all, you would adjust your grain per pixel. So let's scroll up a little bit so we get a sense of our low frequency and our high frequency areas and non-detailed and detailed areas. We slide the grain per pixel over to 1 grain per pixel, and we get very massive grain, right? It's very noticeable. It's highly granular, and it can work really nicely. If I zoom out, this does have an interesting sense to it, and it's definitely grungy, right? So if that's what you're after, you take that grain per pixel slider to the left, you get that really beautiful grain. And I'm going to slide it to the right a little bit. I'm going to zoom back in. So this time I'm actually going to just tap Command plus on my Mac or Control plus if I'm on a PC. It's a shortcut for zooming in. And I want to show you the hardness. So right now the grain hardness is set to as soft as it possibly can be. If I slide this over to the right, basically the grain hardness, it kind of increases the amount of contrast between each of those grains. And so therefore it looks like it's sharper or harder, right? If you slide this down, so it's not necessarily increasing or decreasing the overall sort of regular contrast within the image. It's actually looking at the grain and grain structure and then attempting to delineate it more if it is over towards, if the slider's over towards the hard side, or sort of subdue the look of the grain as it's over towards the softer. And again, this is completely subjective. So however you like your image to look, you can sort of adjust these accordingly. The Ilford Pan film emulation itself, in fact, if I just go back into it and click on it again, Ilford Pan 100, resets it as I click on it again. The original or the normal amount of grain per pixel would be 460 in this case, and then soft. Now, one last thing I want to show you with the grain tool here. I'm going to increase the grain. We're at 181. And this is an important thing to note and a very important feature of the grain engine that creates the grain within Silver Efex, and that is the fact that the tonal value affects the look of the grain, meaning if I change the brightness or the contrast in the image, the grain is going to change with it, which basically means the grain isn't just a filter overlaid on the image. It's actually looking at the density, at the brightness level of this portion of the image compared to this portion of the image compared to any of these areas. And if I change the contrast, you'll actually be able to see the grain kind of shift and change and dance around. And so this is a good way of getting a sense of what's happening here. I'm increasing the amount of contrast in the image, so you are going to get that sense as well. But basically what we're getting here is a shift in how much grain is showing up based upon the density level of whatever the grain is being applied to. So it's important to know that, and you can get a different look and feel out of that grain as you adjust your contrast levels. All right, so that's the grain per pixel tool and the grain section of the film types. Moving into the color sensitivity. So all of these aspects, grain, color sensitivity, and levels and curves, are what makes up these film emulations. So these are the responses that are being copied from the actual film types using target images as well as sort of subjective or out in the real world imagery to try to match what these images would look like with these particular kinds of film. And so the color sensitivity is how the color is actually translated from color to black and white. And that is the brightness level of those colors. So if I were to take this red slider and slide it to the right, anything that's red in the image is going to get brighter. If I slide it to the left, anything that's red is going to get darker, because that sort of sand area, this is, I think, or not sand, the rocky area is primarily sort of sand color, red and yellow and orange. We're going to see a dramatic response with that red slider, as opposed to the sky, where if I take my blue slider and I start sliding that around, I get a completely different response there, right? And in fact, the image starts to look like infrared imaging as I start to basically bring that blue, maybe the cyan down a whole bunch, and then maybe bring the red out and a little bit of yellow. And voila, now we have a completely different look to the image. But now we've taken our our Ilford Pan 100 speed film and sort of emulated the look of an infrared on this particular photograph. So one more thing to note, just to show you here, I'm going to open up our presets section, the tools palette on the left side, and I want to move into the history state browser. I just want to remind you of what the image looked like in color as I move through these color sensitivities. And this is kind of a neat trick for being able to see your original color photograph. If I click and hold the compare button in the upper left corner, while I'm in the history state browser, the little sort of mapping tool shows up. And what you're seeing here is whatever's highlighted in yellow, whatever sort of section here or tool adjustment is highlighted in yellow on the left side is what you're going to be seeing just inherently, right? If I were to click and drag this little flag up or down, what you'd be seeing as you click the compare button is what the image looked like at that particular state, right? So if I click and hold compare, right now we're looking at what happens with the red color sensitivity down at 100%. If I actually click that flag and drag it all the way to the top to the original image and click the compare button, you'll actually see the original color photograph. So this is nice because it's just a little bit of a reminder of what colors are where. And so as you make your color sensitivity adjustments, you're able to see that in sort of not necessarily real time, but when you click and hold that compare button. I'm going to go ahead and click to bring that back to neutral. If we take a look at the compare button now, this is the original image. This is our image as we've clicked on the Ilford Pan 100 film and then looked at the color sensitivity so far. All right, let's hide that tool set over there and let's just make some adjustments. I'm into that look with the infrared sort of feel where we're darkening down that blue sky. Let's go ahead and brighten up the reds a little bit and the yellows and greens. There we go. And I'm going to use a control point in this case. So this time, let's close film types. We're going to take a look at the curves adjustment on the next image. In this case, I'm going to go into the the control points, and I'm just going to add a couple control points into the image and start to selectively kind of dodge and burn based upon where I want you as the viewer to be looking at this photograph. So I'm going to take this structure slider to the right. I'm going to darken down that rock just a little bit. I'm going to actually duplicate this control point. So one of the ways to duplicate a control point within the NIK plugins is to hold the Option key if you're on a Mac, or hold the Alt key if you're on a PC. While you're holding it, you click on the control point that you want to duplicate and drag it away. So it's Option or Alt, click and drag. And you actually can probably just barely see it because it's just a small shift, but my cursor, the cursor there, if I'm scrolled over a control point, there's a little crosshair right now. If I hold the Option key down, that crosshair turns into a little plus button. And that indicates that if I click on the control point and drag away, I'm going to get a duplicated control point. So it's just a nice little feature and a shortcut. And you know, the beauty of this tool is like, you can open up the software, you can click on a preset and maybe one of these film types and get really brilliant, wonderful results. And you can grow with the software, right? So you get to use the presets and the color filters and the film types as, you know, it's sort of in the, let's say, the beginning of your journey with Silver Efex Pro. And then as you get more experienced, you start to utilize control points and the different global adjustment tools. And you can really start to control the viewer's attention through the picture utilizing all of these tools. The film types are an amazing way to kind of get started and to yield a really fantastic image right off the bat. And then from there, what you're able to do is really hone the photograph and make it either how you saw it or how you envision it, or how you want the image to be to invoke something within your viewer's attention. So I've added a film border in this case, or an image border, and let's just take a quick look at the before and after. Here's the original image. Here's our enhanced image using the Ilford Pan 100 speed film, adjusting the color sensitivity, and then playing with some control points and the finishing adjustments. I'm going to go ahead and click the Save button in the lower right corner. As that saves, I'll jump into the GoToWebinar control panel to just take a look and see how everybody's doing. All right. So a question that just came in, if you've already converted to black and white in Photoshop and then go into Silver Efex, will you be able to use the film emulations and color filters? So yeah, Dennis, kind of. So I would recommend, to get the most out of Silver Efex, you take the color image from your Photoshop or raw processor or whatever you're using into Silver Efex. If you've converted an image from color to black and white before going into Silver Efex Pro, the film emulations will work a little bit because it will adjust the grain and then the curve, but the color sensitivity and the color filters won't work because there's no color information for the software to deal with. So great question, and helpful in our case here to sort of mention that point. So thank you for the question. Can control points be used selectively to make changes in film types? Betty, cool. No, good question. So the question is, can control points be used to like adjust the film types stuff? No, they can't be. The film types themselves would be sort of an overall adjustment, but technically there is a workflow where you could use multiple film types and put them together using layer masks in Photoshop. That we're not going to be able to talk about that for very much here, but maybe at the end of the webinar we can do that. We'll have some time for the Q&A. What can you do to minimize grayscale stepping in the sky? Okay, so good question. So in this situation, I don't think we have any of that. There are two things that you can do though, Mark. If you're seeing sort of stair stepping or posterization in the sky because of, let's say, added contrast, you can add grain, and that's going to minimize that. And or also use a 16-bit per channel file. And if you are using a 16-bit per channel file, really the only solution is to add noise or add grain. But a 16-bit per channel file is going to help immensely if you're using an 8-bit per channel file and getting that posterization, because there's far less information in an 8-bit file. All right, so here's our original image. We are back here over into Photolab 3, and here's our black and white conversion. Lovely. So let's do a portrait in this case. So let's take a look at this image. I actually haven't converted this image to black and white yet, and it's not without its. So we've got this beautiful bride here, absolutely stunning bride. And we've got a couple little issues like this. There's like a door handle over here. So I'm just going to get rid of that first, I think anyways, unless I am not able to find the tool that I want. Detail, repair. So we're going to go into the repair tool, and let's see what would happen if I just go and paint this out. This is like a clone stamp tool, and it usually does a good job to get rid of this stuff. I'm not sure if it's going to work out for us in the long run. I might need to take different measures to clean that up. But basically this little repair tool clones that out for us. I'm pretty happy with that result. Let's see what happens if we clean this up a little. And then we'll open this up into Silver Efex. It's okay. Definitely not the best. Nope, let's Command Z that. I like what was happening there. Yeah, this is okay. That'll work. So, the fact that we've got this repair tool here in Photolab 3 is really quite nice, because that just means I don't have to worry about opening it up into some other piece of software to clone that out. I can just do this right here. I'm going to click close. Let's go ahead and open this directly into Silver Efex Pro. And in fact, before we do that, sorry, here I'm throwing you off a little bit. Let's just see what the DxO Smart Lighting is doing on this image. So that's without the DxO Smart Lighting. This is with. I think I actually prefer this image without the DxO Smart Lighting, but the one thing I'm definitely going to need to do is just bring the highlights down a little bit, because I was losing some detail in the bride's dress around her shoulder because of that window light. So where was I going with that? The things that you do to set up your image in the raw process will have a dramatic effect. Like if I were to go in and do a whole bunch of work on this image, let's say we take a control point, because we've got control points built into Photolab 3 here, and I kind of bring the brightness level of her cheek back up just a little bit, and then size that to be a little bit smaller. Because when I was dulling down the highlights on her dress here, it was also sort of adjusting the highlight on her skin, and it didn't work for me. Oops. And so from there, I'm going to click New Mask. And one of the reasons you might want to be using your raw processor quite a bit before going into, let's say, Silver Efex Pro, is because in the raw file, you have a lot more information than in a 16-bit per channel, or even especially an 8-bit per channel TIFF file. So I'm going to go in and kind of dodge and burn in these areas where I know I'm going to be adjusting in the post-processing aspect or in the Silver Efex aspect of the workflow. This This image was shot in a sort of dual illuminant scene, meaning there's some sort of warm red light over here, and then we've got window light coming from over here. And it works nicely on her skin for sure, but on her dress in some of these shadow areas, I don't like what it's doing to the color, so I'm going to go ahead and just cool it down a little bit. And of course, we are converting this to black and white, but color temperature is very important when converting from color to black and white, because color temperature can adjust or control contrast in ways that you want to optimize before going into Silver Efex Pro. So let's say I'm happy with the color and contrast of this photo. I'm going to go ahead into the Silver Efex Pro software from here. And as that's launching, I'll open up the GoToWebinar control panel and see if anything's going on in it. Nope, doesn't look like it. Lori said it's snowing in California. Oof. I think we're supposed to get, it's supposed to cool off here in Rochester, New York, and sort of Western New York today or tomorrow as a cold front is moving in. And so we're going to get some snow as well, which I'm excited about because the first snow that we had in Rochester, I was in India, which was probably lucky simply for the fact that I got to go to India and it was really a wonderful trip. But also I miss snow and I really want to take photos in snow because it's a beautiful thing to do. Now, moving into our film types. So we looked at our grain on the last image as well as our color sensitivity. Let's go ahead and find an interesting black and white conversion with our film type here. Scroll over each one and give it a second so that it renders for the webinar. And what I'm noticing and what I thought was going to happen here is that a lot of these film presets are, film emulations are pretty high contrast. And so I might like basically what one of these is doing, but maybe it's higher contrast than I need. You know, there's a couple things that we can do. First of all, I'm going to click on this Fuji Neopan 400. I like the grain structure. I like what it's doing to color sensitivity. It's working nicely. I still have a little bit of separation of her hair from the background. Now, of course, we could move into the global adjustments if one of these presets or film types were too high contrast, and we could just reduce the contrast. You could just slide that slider to the left, and that's going to help us, and it's going to be a quick fix. If you want more control over contrast, you know, aside from your general contrast sliders, and then your amplify whites, amplify blacks, and soft contrast, you can go into the levels and curves tool inside of film types, and you can adjust the curve. And in fact, as we do this, so we're not going to stick with the Fuji Neopan. I'm going to click on that, and I just want to show you some of the different curves. So the ADOX Silver Max is a pretty dramatic curve, right? As opposed to that Neopan 400, which has a pretty subtle curve to it. Oop, where'd I go? It's Neopan 400, which has a pretty soft curve to it, a little adjustment in the shadows, a little adjustment in the highlights. Let's talk about how to use this tool. In fact, I'm going to reset all of these little dots here, all of the control tool points in the curves by just double clicking on each one. And now we have a neutral curve. This is what would happen if you just opened the software. The level and curve is just sort of flat and neutral. First things first, on the left side of the tool, in the lower left corner, you have a levels shadow adjustment. In the bottom, you have a levels, a mid-tone adjustment, and then you have a highlight adjustment, right? And as you adjust that, it's going to be, if I take the slider, sorry, not slider, if I take the highlight levels tool and I slide that to the left, what we're doing is we are creating a steeper curve. We're creating more contrast in the levels and curves. And then we're also cutting off any information that might be over here in our histogram. And in fact, to see that, let's go ahead and just open our histogram and you can get a sense of what's happening there. Watch as I slide my levels tool. So you see at the original adjustment, we have all highlight detail right there in the levels and curve, or in the histogram rather, and we have all shadow detail as well. But if I take that levels adjustment and I start sliding it to the left, I'm brightening up those highlights. And in this case, I'm also starting to clip some information. You can see that occurring in that histogram there. Now, that's your levels tool, right? You can adjust midtones, so we can darken or brighten the midtones. If you double click on that adjustment, it's going to home the slider or home the tool, gets it back to its original default. And if I take my shadows tool and I slide that to the right, I'm going to be darkening down those shadows. You can actually get some interesting effects from that for sure. In this case, it's already a pretty high dynamic range scene, right? We've got this highlight of her shoulder into the shadow of her hair. So I want to be careful to retain detail. Now that's the levels tool. In the curves adjustment tool, if you click on a point, so if you literally just go to the line, the actual curve line, and you click on it, it's going to drop a point. And depending upon where you drop that point and what you do as sliding up or sliding down with that point, you're going to get a different result. But to try to explain how this is working, if I click and drop a point right in the middle, and then I drag the curve up, what I'm doing is I'm taking the midtones, the stuff that's in the middle of the histogram, the things that are kind of more gray in the image, and I'm going to be brightening those things up. And then, of course, what that has to do so that the line stays continuous is, of course, it has to be adjusted with it, right? So if I slide this down, we're going to be darkening the image overall. If I slide it up, we're going to be brightening the image overall. And the beauty of this is that you can pick and choose, and you can spend hours and hours in here trying to figure out exactly how you want your curve to work. And we're making a custom curve basically for this photograph. So let's say we love this contrast range and structure. I'm losing a little bit of shadow detail, so I'll bring that all up. Let's say this is beautiful and it's exactly what we want. I'm going to leave that curve as is, and I'm going to go ahead and just save this as my own custom Fuji Neopan preset, as if we somehow change the curve, maybe in the processing of the, with the chemistry of the film. Maybe we chose a different kind of chemistry, and this is going to affect the way that the curve responds to this exposure. So we're going to call this a custom Fuji Neopan preset. So to do that, to save this, I'm going to click into the button in the upper left corner, which is going to reveal our tools palette. I'm going to go into the custom section of the presets, and I'm going to go ahead and just click the plus button. And now with the plus button, I'm going to name this like Dan Fuji Neopan 400. And that will now have my custom film emulation that I've created for this particular image. And possibly, since this is a wedding photograph, I would apply this to a whole bunch of other images from the wedding, just to keep a consistent look and feel. So actually with that, let's see what happens if we do save this and then open up another image and see what happens from this same shoot. So let's click the save button. That'll bring us back over into Photolab. We'll have our adjusted image. So it'll take it a second to kind of snap to. And then what we're going to do is go to this photograph from the same shoot and just see what happens when we utilize that same preset. In fact, I think I'm going to crop this image just a little bit before we move into that. So click on the crop, move into manual, and then let's just go ahead and crop this down just a touch. A little less headroom for her. Click close. Go into the NIK Collection, Silver Efex Pro. As that's launching, let's open up the GoToWebinar control panel. Charles is in Buffalo. Great. Charles, good to see. I haven't been to Buffalo in a couple months, but I'm heading out there in January for a workshop or a talk for the camera club out there. Okay, so going back into our Silver Efex. Dan Fuji Neopan, let's click on it, see what happens. Voila. So now we have the exact same film emulation, our custom film emulation, which, by the way, isn't just sort of using our curve that we've created, but it's utilizing the color sensitivity of that Fuji Neopan, and then also the grain that we've placed on the image because of that particular film type. So if we look at our before and after, we've got our original image, which is, it's a beautiful digital photograph. It's kind of flat and a little bit linear. And now we have our enhanced image, which we're not really doing that much to it, but now the photo starts to come to life. And in fact, I say we go into the sort of highlight area on Amanda's cheek here, and let's go ahead and just brighten that up a little bit. Not much, I don't want to take it too high. And I want to go into, I do want to retain some sort of nice dark shadow. Because the photographer shot directly into the light source here, there's some flare, and therefore we're not getting anything that's completely jet black. But we can kind of get that back if we want to anyways, using some of these control points. So let's darken that down. Her dress had pockets, so she's highlighting these pockets with this picture here, which I think is brilliant. Wedding dress with pockets. And I love the look of these wedding images with a film type, as well as some of the finishing adjustments. So to finish this image off, let's go ahead and use like a selenium toner. So here we'll use this blue kind of toner. We can customize these, of course. I'm not going to do that right now, but we could if we wanted to. And I'm going to put a film border around the edge just to kind of finish it off. And I tend to use type number 1. I love what happens with type number 1. And then I usually take the spread down to 0. Actually, this isn't going to work that well on this image because I'm not going to be able to hold the corner with any detail unless maybe I add a control point and darken down that corner a little bit. See what happens. Get a little bit of the edge now. Just by darkening that down, add a little bit of contrast so that it sort of reaches the same contrast range of the rest of the image. And then let's click the save button. And then from there, we're just going to take a look at those two images kind of side by side, just to make sure that they kind of have a similar look to them. So here's the last sort of wedding image that we just took a look at with that Fuji Neopan preset that we customized for our own use. And then we've got our finalized other image as well. Now, let's see, we've covered everything for the webinar. It's 11:46 here. I'm going to go ahead and I'll call it, that's the webinar. We're good to go. I have so many more things to show you, so definitely come back to the other webinars that we're going to be having over the next few weeks. Come to Vinny's, come to Tony Corbell's if you can, and absolutely join me as we're going to move into some sort of more custom uses of these presets and film types, and then also talking about film emulations in color photography as well. For now, let's go ahead and transition into our Q&A. If you do have any questions in regards to the things that we've seen today, or anything you might have that I might be able to answer in regards to the NIK plugins, feel free to type them into the questions box there, and we'll go from there. If not, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today on this rainy Rochester day. Hopefully, it's snowing in California. It's rainy in York. No snow in Buffalo right now, but hopefully you're having a good day on your Wednesday. I'm going to open up this image into Silver Efex. Thank you, Lori. That was great. And we'll go from there. If there's no questions, I don't need to stick around too much longer, but I want to make sure that I do answer any questions. Mark, thanks for joining. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well. Jill says it's snowing in Wisconsin. Right, Wisconsin, yeah, WI. Jill, I was in Milwaukee this summer. What a great place. I love Milwaukee. I like cities like that though. Relatively small city, but things are happening. John, will this be available? Yes, the webinar is available, it will be available. It will be posted on the NIK Software YouTube, and then it's highly likely that it'll show up on the NIK Software website as well. Let's jump back into that. So if you go to the nikcollection.dxo.com and then move into the Learn and Support section, if you click into the recorded webinars, we've got a boatload of webinars that have been recorded and posted here. This webinar will be at some point. I'm not sure what the ETA is on that, but it'll also show up on YouTube as well. Hector, I didn't see a film type for Codolith. Does one exist? Good question, Hector. DxO actually has another piece of software that is a plugin. It's called, oh shoot, now it escapes me. FilmPack. It's called FilmPack, and I think the newest one that they're on is called FilmPack 5. I don't remember if there's a Codolith film type emulation, but that would be a cool one to make for sure. That's definitely a favorite in a lot of folks, or for a lot of folks. Codolith, it was a copy film, isn't it, Hector? Sunny and 35 in Seattle. Can you demonstrate the color filters on the first bride image? The color filters. Yes, John, absolutely will open that up. Are there any webinars on DxO PhotoLab 3? I'm using Lightroom and I'm liking what I see while you're using it. Millie, yes, there are, and there's a lot of content on YouTube from DxO on PhotoLab 3. And in fact, I think one of my upcoming webinars, I'm going to be using DxO PhotoLab 3 quite a bit. Where did I put that interface? So let me just show this one thing here. Which one? So Millie, this webinar, Secrets to Creative Film Results using the NIK collection. Oh no, that's not the one, is it? It's this one. Make your photos stand out. 3 tips in selective editing using DxO PhotoLab and the NIK collection. So Millie, this webinar, we're going to be talking about PhotoLab 3, primarily the selective adjustment tools that are within PhotoLab 3, as well as using the selective capabilities within the NIK collection. But PhotoLab 3 has control points, has a gradient tool and a brush tool as well. So you don't have to just use control points when in PhotoLab 3. I just find myself using them a lot in PhotoLab 3 because I am used to that and I love the way that they work. Very cool. Thanks, Chris. Kitty, you said, can you briefly describe the characteristics of the 10 new, just brief high points of each film? Sure, I mean, I sure can try. So I need to open up another image into PhotoLab. And then as we do that, I'll answer 2 questions at once. So let's go to this first image. Let's launch Amanda into Silver Efex. Oh no, what's this? Oh yeah, use unique names. So I'll make a second version. So while we're in PhotoLab, what's happening is we've got the original raw photo, and then the image next to it was our initial Silver Efex image that we had created. And now what I've done is I've told the software to create another copy so that we're working in a non-destructive workflow to take a look at what the different color filters would do here. So I had a question that came in that was in regards to the color filters on this image, and that's just taking a look at what would happen when we use the different color filters on this photograph. So one thing is, like, the only real color that's in this image is probably her skin tone, and then the slight difference of color and hue in the shadow area of her dress. The rest of the image is pretty neutral. So we're not going to see a really dramatic difference within the film types, aside from those 2 areas, the shadow area of her dress and then her skin tone. But like the blue color filter, so what this is doing, just for anyone, I didn't explain this one while we were clicking on it earlier. These color filters work just like shooting black and white film and putting a glass color filter in front of your lens. And so what's happening if you click on the blue color filter is you're only letting certain portions of light of the spectrum through that lens. Only certain colors can transmit through a blue color filter, right? Blue, basically. And some slightly other colors, and then also UV tones as well, are probably, depending upon the color filter, going to transmit through that blue color filter. And so what's happening when we click on that is all of the blue things in the image are going to get lighter, and anything on the opposite end of the color spectrum is going to get darker. So if I click on the red color filter, what's happening here is anything that's red and yellow and on that end of the color spectrum, on that end of the color wheel, that's going to lighten up, and then anything on the opposite end of the color wheel or color spectrum is going to sort of darken down. Blues and greens are going to darken down with the red color filter. Now, the other thing to note is that these are kind of the 5 most popular black and white color filters. There were and are other color filters aside from 25A and 67 and so on. You can actually create your own color filter though. So you can go into the hue slider here, and this is going to allow you to generate and create your own color filter. And this might be a very cool way of creating your own custom look, along with creating a film type and adjusting your own presets in that way, right? Because we can turn the strength up and down. Now we have a glowing bride. Adjust that to here. Let's take a look at the before and after with that color filter, which actually comes to life nicely. I like that. And then maybe just a control point over on the left. So the next question was just in regards to sort of a brief overview of the different films. So moving into the film types and into the 10 new ones, they are listed here in alphabetical order. And what you can see is basically what you get, right? Now, all of these different film types, not all of them, I shouldn't say that, but most of them are coming from different film manufacturers, right? And what they're doing is they have a different aim depending upon that particular film type. So the ADOX Silver Max is it's made by ADOX, and it's a film that had and has a lot of silver in it, as opposed to maybe a less expensive film, which has a lesser actual silver content. And that's basically going to help to create a different look. Now, in this case, and with Silver Max, it's a higher contrast film, and therefore, as you scroll over it, you're going to see that. Whereas the Agfa Scala 200X is a lower contrast film and is a little bit more subdued. As we move into the Berger BRF 400 Plus, now we're starting to see some of that grain structure. Like if we scroll to this 200 speed and then into the 400 speed, you're starting to see a little bit more grain because of the higher ISO film, and therefore larger grain, and therefore it's more noticeable. Fomapan Classic is another, in this case, higher contrast film compared to the Scala. Now, the thing that we need to think about and keep in mind is that in folks who shoot or have shot black and white film, depending upon how you expose and how you process the film, you're going to get very different results, right? And so the thing to think about here is the way that you set up, or if you will, the way that you can kind of emulate different kinds of chemistry or different kinds of processing when using these film types is to change what you do in the raw processing. And even as much as that, change what you do when you capture the image. If I were to cancel this photo and then we move into like this image, this photograph is going to get a completely different result and look out of all of those film types compared to this photograph, right? Because this image, it's in the morning, so there's still these nice long shadows, but I'm not facing the light source as I'm shooting. The sort of smog and fog have moved or dissipated a little bit in this situation, whereas here I'm shooting into the light source, actually slightly after this image, but basically you're seeing this atmosphere occurring, and depending upon what you do, like let's say you turn on the clear view, if I turn this on and then I use the Fomapan 100 Classic, I'm going to get a totally different result than if I didn't turn it on, right? And in this case, I really love what's happening with the sort of atmosphere of the image and sort of the timing and the gesture of everything that's going on in the photo. And so I want to emphasize that using my film type. And I'm not so interested in the texture and in the detail. You know, sure, it's kind of important here and there. But where like this image, this photo to me is about the differences of color, the differences of the, you know, these lines and textures. And it's really important, I think in this case, to emphasize those lines and textures, right? I mean, if you zoom all the way in this case, this is a nice sharp picture. There's really beautiful textures and tones. I'm going to use a higher contrast, higher textured preset and set of adjustments, both in my raw processing as well as in my Silver Efex processing, simply because it's going to create the look that I think I'm after in this case. All right, hopefully I answered those questions.